Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe. Special thanks goes out to Jeff McAvoy and especially co-producer Dennis Diken, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' 9th studio LP, Summer Days and Summer Nights, in an epic roundtable discussion with special guests Dennis Diken, Mark Freed, and Jeff Levinson. And away we go then! On today's super special Summer Days and Summer Nights roundtable episode of Discograffiti, we're going to do something just a teensy bit different. Today's three guests will be introducing themselves in a Discograffiti first. Lads and ladies, please welcome, and this is with 2 exclamation points as per the LP's title, Dennis Diken, Mark Freed, and Jeff Levinson.
I'll start. I'm Dennis Diken. Thank you for that, Dave. People know me as a founding member and drummer of the Smithereens. Next month, I'm not sure when this is going to hit the air, but in March of this year, the band I'm talking about, the Smithereens, turns 45 years old, if you can dig that. And through the years, I've played with a bunch of different people and written some articles and done liner notes and listened to a lot of records.
Hey, this is Mark Freed. So I'll try to be as brief. Music fan since birth, transistor radio attached to my ear night and day, and obviously raising the greatest songs of the 60s, from doo-wop to the Brill Building to Cameo Parkway to Motown to Stax and Muscle Shoals and the British Invasion. I loved all the Beach Boys singles, but fell under Brian's spell at about 15. And of course, at that point, I had to find and devour every piece of music I could find. At that point, a little older, desperately wanted to give back to all the writers and artists on my 45s. I lucked into a job at BMI, the royalty-paying organization, where I was like a kid in a candy store, repping nearly half of the world's songwriters, and got to work closely with greats like Lamont Dozier and Steve Cropper, Carole King, Alan Gordon, Dennis Lambert, Papa John Phillips, many others. And Al Jardine wandered in one day. We became friends, and I helped him find a lifelong collaborator outside of the Beach Boys. And I also produced a songwriter event toward the end of my BMI tenure where Brian and Ronnie Spector sang Be My Baby and Don't Worry Baby together. And I think it was for the first time. 1995, the urging of Papa John, I started a publishing company called Spirit Music to expressly protect and promote veteran songwriters and artists and their classic catalogs. And through, 30 years, I've been lucky to work with such musical heroes of mine as Lou Christie, Lou Reed, Bob Marley, Aretha Franklin, Pete Townsend, Grateful Dead, Cheap Trick, Charles Mingus, Jim Henson Company, and in true pinch me moment, represented Brian's post-'80s catalog, as well as a few nuggets from the 60s.
I'm Jeff Levinson, and first off, I am so delighted to be hanging in such august company. Is so hip to hear about everybody's background. So I'm a jazz producer. I've been in the business since 77. I started out as a jazz journalist. I became the editor of Billboard magazine, and then I became a record executive. I ran the jazz department at Columbia Records with Branford Marsalis. Subsequent to that, I created a label called Half Note Records, which was connected to the Blue Note Jazz Club in New York. And then in recent years, I have become an educator. I produce the Herbie Hancock International competition each year, and I've been a trustee at the Grammys. And in my travels to Europe, I routinely do workshops on Brian Wilson and the making of pet sounds. As a jazz guy, most of my colleagues believe that my heroes are Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, Billie Holiday, and yes. However, on my iPhone, I have a screensaver of the David Anderley portrait of Brian, because for me, Brian is the hero among heroes. And somehow, when I saw that Leonard Bernstein clip in April '67 of Brian debuting Surf's Up, it either changed my life or it made my life or it did something which brings me here with you guys. So I feel myself very connected to not just the music, but somehow the spirit of Brian and those who love him as I do. And thank you all for inviting me to this bash.
Well, you guys are all very, very impressive people. And I'm really excited to talk with people who are not just incredibly friendly and mensch-like in their demeanor, but also as erudite on the subject, as you all are. Also, I want to mention that today is Dennis Diken's birthday.
Yo!
Let's see, if you guys don't mind, let's sing. I don't know how this is going to come out on Zoom, but let's sing him happy birthday, can we?
No, come on.
I say
Happy
yes.
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Hi, this is Denny.
Happy birthday, dear Dennis. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, fellas. Very nice. I share a birthday with Enrico Caruso and Jim Backus, I just would like you to know. And Don Randy. So how about
George
that?
Harrison.
Yeah, George Harrison too. And on the very day I was born in 1957, Buddy Holly recorded That'll Be the Day. And the B-side, I'm Looking for Someone to Love.
I believe it's the 60th anniversary of the guys entering the studio to start Summer Days and Summer Nights. It was either yesterday or today, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was yesterday, Mark. I think was it the Help Me Rhonda session? I think I read it was the Help Me Rhonda. But yeah, yesterday. How about that? 60 years? Wow.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. So when we last left our boys, Brian had pulled the second #1 hit out of his magical top hat with Help Me Rhonda, the studio date for which also held the dubious distinction of being the final standoff between Brian and Murray. Once his dad started throwing his drunken weight around, Brian, I believe, toked up with his new buddy, Lauren Schwartz, and wiped Murray out of his professional life for good until all kinds of headaches and heartaches tumbled down the pike 4 years later. Brian has given Guess I'm Dumb to Glenn Campbell and released today an LP which says everything that needs to be said if an explanation were needed for why Brian has decided to stay home and no longer count himself amongst the touring version of the group. On March 8th, 1965, Today is released. 12 days go by and Brian gets up off his lazy ass to start recording again. March 20th, 1965, Brian lays down a tracking session for a tune with the working title of I Hate Rock and Roll. Vocal overdubs and a mono mix are what occur on the day, and then eventually the track is renamed Let 'Em Run Wild, and work on it resumes 2 weeks later. March 22nd, Help Me Rhonda, the single, is completed. This is an important day, and I think we should stop here for a second because a conversation is held about the next album. After, what I'm assuming that Mike and probably the record company and maybe some others see as the weepy navel-gazing of their last LP, Mike is insistent, apparently, that the group's next album be more upbeat and positive. At first, allegedly, Brian opposes the idea, but he relents. At some point during this conversation, Brian relents, and recordings for Summer Days and Summer Nights begin a week later on the 29th. Do you guys have any inside intel about maybe Brian wanting to do Today Part 2 as opposed to All Summer Long Part 2?
I don't. That's a really good question. Do you guys know anything about that? This whole premise of All Summer Long Part 2 I only learned that in recent years. I never really realized. So I'm very interested and curious to know if anybody else does to illuminate this whole this whole thing, because I only learned about that idea in recent years. So that's fascinating to me.
Dave, are we suggesting here that this is the beginning of a kind of friction thing, a push and a pull between Brian and Mike and the record company regarding a different creative direction? Is it showing up here like for the first time? Was that the implication of what you described, or am I hearing it wrong?
Apparently, there was a conversation that was held either after or before the date where the Help Me Rhonda single was completed. And they're talking about the next record, what it's going to be like. And apparently the direction that Brian was going to go was to continue the road he'd already started traveling with Today. There might be some disagreements that the four of us have on what Summer Days and Summer Nights is, but I think we can all probably agree that it's an about face from Today.
There's not a lot in the books speaking to this point, but I think the fact that Today only went to number four on the album, right? And was considered somewhat of a disappointment to Capitol, who had the Beatles and lots of other stuff, ruling at that point, that there was pressure, and there had to be stepped up pressure. I'm sure that's right, to just keep making hits. And logically, record companies, not logically, but record companies look back at the last set of stuff that really sells, and they tell their artists, do that again. I mean, that's been happening for decades. And so I think it's logical to assume that kind of conversation took place. I'm sure if Mike wasn't thinking it, he began to think it, even if only he'd overheard one conversation in a group meeting with Capitol, and would have, started encouraging, if not pushing, Brian to make sure he put fun stuff that would be hits on the next record.
Yeah, and apparently there was only enough pushback, if any, from Brian to last during this one session, because when they started to make this thing, it was just a kind of a straight shot. All right, that concludes your free sneak peek into today's Patreon episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either purchase this podcast by itself for $4, or better yet, subscribe at the major tier and get access to Discograffiti's 4 weekly episodes. That's Friday's free episode, the Sunday Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound episode, which showcases Patreon members and the Elephant Six world, your Monday bonus episode, and your Wednesday early release ad-free super extended director's cut of that Friday's show. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 6-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member so you don't miss a single thing at patreon.com/discograffiti.